With the release of Operator and DeepSeek, you might be wondering what it is that OpenAI is doing that helps them just keep winning, even though there really isn't any moat in terms of the underlying AI capabilities. DeepSeek R1 proves that there's basically no moat in terms of making models that can think. So, what is OpenAI doing differently that is keeping them ahead of the game? Now, I've been thinking about this, and as it turns out, I actually figured this out about 2 years ago. But then I finally connected the dots. Those two little neurons finally found each other in my brain. So here is what OpenAI is doing differently. Number one, it's cognitive offloading. So cognitive offloading it's a psychological term, but in industry, we really see it come from two places. At least historically, these are kind of the places where cognitive offloading has really been major. And so the first one is jet fighters. So in a dogfight, you have to make split-second decisions, and there's a lot of things that you have to manage. Jet fighter aircraft are incredibly complicated machines, and if you're not careful, you can destroy the machine just by using it improperly. Now, the avionics of later jet fighters, such as F-22s and F-35s, are smart enough that you just steer it where you want to go like a video game and the aircraft will get there. But older aircraft, you could actually tear the aircraft apart by, jerking the stick around too far or too fast. On top of that, you've got squad mates to keep track of, missiles to keep track of, enemies to keep track of, all kinds of things. So what they found, companies like Lockheed Martin and McDonnell Douglas and all the people that have made jet fighters, what they found is that the best thing that you could do is treat pilot attention like a scarce resource. And by treating their cognitive bandwidth like a scarce resource, that's why whenever you're watching movies like Top Gun, when they're spiraling towards the ground, it's like pull up, pull up. Even the way that it is saying those words, like pull up, is actually designed to maximize the input. And then particularly there's a few scenes in Top Gun where it'll change, like you say, I've got tone. There's a very specific tone that'll play when you've got a lock on someone. And that's like, hey, call your attention to this kind of thing. But it's also those warnings are very precisely timed and calibrated so that the pilot doesn't even have to think about what's going on. They just react to those signals. Another place that this has been used is actually Unix philosophy. So Unix, you're probably familiar, it's a command line terminal, and it's very minimalist output. And in fact, one thing that you might notice if you're a Unix or a Linux user is that if a command that you execute on the command line or on the terminal is successful, there's no output. And the reason that there's no output for most successful commands, unless you need feedback, is because the assumption there is the command that you issued worked. And so rather than distract you with a whole bunch of superfluous output, they just say, it accepted the command, it worked. I spent a lot of time programming Cisco switches and other stuff back in my day, and it's just like, that's one of the most weird things to get used to, those Unix-like command prompts, where it's just like, it didn't tell me that it succeeded. For us, for people that are familiar, are more used to like the Mac and Windows experience, like it'll give you a little pop-up like tasks completed successfully, because most people need that kind of feedback. But anyways, the whole point here is that kind of cognitive offloading, or that is one technological way to engage in cognitive offloading, which is basically it saves you mental time or mental energy. So moving on. Now, why do we use chatbots? A lot of people still say the chatbot isn't even that smart, yet we use them. ChatGPT is one of the most visited websites on the planet. DeepSeek R1 became one of the top grossing, or not grossing, but top downloaded apps in app stores as soon as it came out. So even if these models are not more intelligent than you, which, let's be honest, these AIs are a lot more intelligent than some people we know. But anyways, even if they're not more intelligent than you, why do we still use them? It's because they are cognitive offloaders. They allow us to delegate some kind of cognitive work to them. In fact, all of my slides are formatted by AI. I spend the time typing, this is what I want the slide to say, but then the AI says, okay, cool, I'm going to take that idea and I'm going to format it based on the templates that you gave me. So it still saves me time and specifically mental energy. So they do formatting and articulation. They're language native things, so they're better at speaking, finding the right words for things than most humans are. Another thing is context switching. So what I mean by context switching is instead of having to jump between, an IDE and a browser and a bunch of other programs, what we're building is basically an all-in-one workspace. So instead of having to keep your mental memory, your working memory spooled up about, okay, I've got this information over here and that information over there and this over there and blah, 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 blah. Instead, you keep it all in one place, and you also know that the chatbot is keeping track of everything. You say, where did I put that file? And so you don't have to do context switching. Context switching is very cognitively expensive. Then, like coding and data tasks, one of the primary use cases is coding and data tasks. Now, these chatbots don't necessarily help veteran senior developers, although some more and more senior developers are saying, look, if you're not using AI, like, yes, I'm still smarter than it, but I write 10 times as much code every day using these tools. So, the controlled nature of parsing data and thinking in code. Some people do legitimately think in code. During my heyday of an automation engineer, I thought in code. But that is still very cognitively demanding. So if you can delegate that and instead communicate with the machine in natural language, which your brain is calibrated to do, you're still going to have an easier time because it is simply easier to express yourself in natural language than it is in code or data. Again, unless you're doing it 8 hours a day, every day, and you're good at it. Now, the most recent thing is reasoning. So it took me a while to understand what is the value add of reasoning, because a lot of people, like myself, still get a huge amount of value out of just ordinary chatbots without reasoning. But when you add the reasoning, the chain of thought reasoning that R1 and O3 have added, then what you end up with is they're doing a lot of the conversation without you. So it ends up being faster than you negotiating and talking through an issue with a chatbot, but also it's just cognitive offload. Instead of having a conversation with a chatbot to get the exact response that you need, you just say, I'm going to give you all the context, and then I'm going to sit back and watch you work. That is a form of delegation, which we will talk about more in just a moment. But before we do that, we need to talk about, like, okay, what's the biology here? Like, what's the evolutionary imperative as to why we use these things, even if they're not more intelligent than us, although, let's be honest, they are more intelligent than us in many dimensions already. So number one is human brains are very expensive. They consume 20% of our body's energy or more, depending on, and highly demanding cognitive tasks. Did I say that right? Cognitively demanding tasks. There we go. Cognitively demanding tasks make your brain consume even more energy. So therefore, your noodle is your most expensive organ by far. So anything that you can do to alleviate the constraint on that resource is good. And that's literally the point of an operating system, is to maximize the utility of your most valuable resources, namely your CPU. That's what a motherboard is. Literally the entire point of a motherboard and operating system for a computer is to maximize the utility of the CPU. Your brain is your CPU, and that is the maximally optimized resource, at least in a work context. Now, anything that you can do to alleviate the constraint of your brain is going to be beneficial to your work output. We also have limited peak performance. Most people only have about 2 to 4 hours of peak cognitive load that they can do on any given day. Some of us with weaponized hyperfocus can do it for 8 to 12 hours a day, but that's not necessarily sustainable. Ask me how I know. I've burned out a few times. Another thing is, what this leads to is what I kind of think of as a cognitive runway extension. So anything that you can delegate says, you know what, I'm going to preserve the scarce resource of my attention. I'm going to preserve the scarce resource of my cognitive ability for the really important things that the machine can't do. And so anything that you can delegate, even if it's as simple as formatting a slide, that gives me more runway every single day. Now, you might say, like, some people say, like, oh, human brains are lazy. It's not really laziness. It is an efficiency-seeking heuristic, which you can just simplify as saying our brains are lazy. That's why we're always looking for shortcuts. That's why we have cognitive biases. That's literally why we have cognitive biases, is because it's a shorthand. It's a heuristic that is usually good enough for survival. But in more precise terms, they're usually not good enough. And they also can lead us to be gullible and those sorts of things. But we really do have an evolutionary imperative to work smarter, not harder, because in the wild, you need to preserve your cognitive resources for when it really matters. Like if you say like, hey, we're tracking a tiger because the tiger is eating our children, that's gonna take 100% of your cognitive resources, and you're probably gonna be tired after that. So we have evolved in this environment where you have this really expensive organ and you need to maximize the utility of that organ, and that's why we love shortcuts, and that's why we love offloading and cognitive offloading and delegating. So speaking of delegation, delegation is actually why humanity is the most dominant species on the planet. The first thing that you need to know is that we have a spotlight of attention. You can only be in one place at one time doing one thing. You have 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 2 hands. That's it. Even if your brain can hypothetically keep track of larger systems and bigger things, you're only in one place at one time, which means that if you need to be in two places at a time, you need to delegate to someone else, or, and now that we have AI and soon robotics, delegate to something else. This is what has led to organizational hierarchies, everything from governments to schools to institutions and corporations. Basically, it says, okay, I know how to run the whole factory, but I can only be in one place at one time. So now I need to hire people to run the parts of the factory for me. This is what literally every CEO does. This is what every founder does, is saying, I need to be in two places at once, so let me split my attention. This is why we have division of labor and specialization. And the reason that we can do this, the reason that we can engage in maximal offloading or delegation, is because we have the ability to coordinate with spoken language, writing, and those sorts of things. This is also how governments work, hypothetically. In an ideal world, a government is a delegate. You're hiring someone through voting saying, I want you to represent my interests because I can't go to Congress, but you can go to Congress for me. That is delegation, and delegation is the maximal form of cognitive offloading. All right, are you following along? Real quick, I want to call your attention to my link tree. Link is in the description. So this is everything that I'm up to. So all of my YouTube channels, I'm on Spotify, I'm on Substack, I'm on Patreon. I've got an exclusive Discord server. It's very well moderated and everyone gets along. We talk about everything from post-labor economics to aliens to being neurospicy and everything else. I also have a learning community, which is growing. I add about usually 2 or 3 lessons per week lately. So yeah, it's growing quickly, and jump on in. All right, moving on. So getting back, so I taught you all the theory. So this is exactly how OpenAI is still winning. So number one is ChatGPT. It started, they really struck a chord, and then it's like, okay, cool. ChatGPT is like, they threw it out there and it got 100 million users, fastest product growth ever. Why was it being used? Well, they looked at the telemetry to look at like, okay, what kinds of people are using ChatGPT and what kind of tasks are they using it for? It was mostly coding and marketing. Those were like the two dominant features. Now, there's plenty of other things that it can do, but you know, those are the two prime. Like, I think that those two constitute like something like, I don't know, 40 to 60% of everything that ChatGPT was used for at the time. And so then they said, okay, cool. Well, clearly it's good at these tasks, so let's see what else we can make it good at. So then they started adding other features, tool use, web search, and now reasoning capabilities. Then there's also the canvas and you know, file interpretation. Then they've made it multimodal where it can look at images. So the more information that it can interpret, the more cognitive offloading it can do. Now they're moving into tools like Operator, which is a computer using agent, and Deep Research, which is a internet-based research agent. These form more forms of cognitive offloading. Now, one thing that I'll point out is that at this point, the models are doing things that people are not necessarily capable of. If you follow people online, there are those out there who are top of their field, but they still use these tools not just because they are doing work faster than they could, they're doing work that they couldn't otherwise do. And so it's not just that it's saving cognitive energy now, it's also extending the capabilities of humans. And that's only going to get better as these models get smarter, because remember, this is still the first generation of these kinds of tools. It would be very silly to assume that they will not get better year over year over year, meaning that not only will they become more autonomous over time, they will become smarter over time, meaning you can delegate more and more to them over time. Now, one of the most important things to understand is that fundamentally these are a kind of automation technology. up until now, even digital automation was still mostly mechanistic. If this, then that. Hit this series of buttons. But this kind of automation, this AI-enabled automation, is cognitive automation. This is the first kind of automation that allows really true, not just, crunching numbers, because that's what database jobs do. You wouldn't want someone doing that by hand. But at the same time, this allows for cognitive delegation for tasks that normally you could only delegate to another human or a very, very expensive, sophisticated automation engine. But instead, it's a one-size-fits-all general-purpose automation engine. And it creates a virtuous cycle as well. Because as these models get smarter, guess who's also using these for cognitive offloading? All the researchers working on these models. Everything from Notebook LM to deep research, guess who's going to be the first ones to use them is the AI researchers. So, moving on. Now, if you are a company or a business leader or a researcher or a strategist or a product owner or whatever it is, and you're watching this, here is how I have coached people in my consultancy about how to go about this kind of cognitive offloading strategy. The number one thing you do is identify the high bandwidth tasks. What are the things that are most cognitively demanding? It can be things that require specialized knowledge, because then you can just use retrieval augmented generation or RAG to inject knowledge into chatbots that they wouldn't otherwise have. Although chatbots have a lot of information today, and a lot of it is baked in. So it could be specialized information. It could also just be, this is a task that is so demanding that I avoid it as much as I can every day. One example that I consulted for was someone who is an insurance concierge. So because American insurance companies are so Byzantine and so convoluted, you actually need someone who is a patient advocate, that you talk to them and they talk to the insurance company for you. That is a very high paying job because you have to know all the ins and outs of who to talk to, how to talk to them, what to bring, and those sorts of things. But AI can really help with that because, you can not just give it a checklist of check your I's and dot your T's, but it also already knows a lot about the insurance companies and can help you strategize before calling the insurance company. That's just one example of a consultation that I did a few years ago. Now, the next thing that you can do is once you identify those high cognitively demanding tasks, then you say, okay, is there an existing tool like ChatGPT that we can train people to use for this specific task that will engage in cognitive offload? Or can we build a tool that will engage in cognitive offload in this particular case? The next thing is they're going to be faster. So they can, one of the ways that you can get ROI is that it will save your employees or your users time. Time is money. It's really that simple. And then, as I mentioned earlier, it can extend your cognitive runway. So instead of effectively getting only 2 to 4 hours of good cognitive labor from a person each day, you can get effectively 6 to 8 hours or more if you use the virtuous cycle of automation and cognitive offloading. And then finally, another opportunity is with smarter AI tools, you can actually empower less qualified employees to work at a higher level. It raises the floor of performance. Now, what we really, taking a step back, the writing on the wall is very obvious. You will, as a business leader, as a product owner, as a proprietor of a corporation, or as a government official or whatever, this affects all of humanity, this affects everyone, is that eventually you want to get to total delegation to these machines as much as possible. So we will still always need a human principal controlling these agents or someone who is ultimately responsible. There's principal agent theory out there, which I'm still working on understanding, like, okay, how is this going to reshape corporations? So stay tuned for that. But basically, the human in the loop is basically you need a human economic principal, which is a human who is legally and financially responsible for the agent, and then the agent's work flows back to them. So then you say, okay, well, if there's a few humans that own all the agents, then they're going to get all the benefit, but then ownership doesn't really make sense in this future. Anyways, that's post-labor economics. Getting off topic. Coming back to it, it always comes back to better, faster, cheaper, and safer. So when automation produces better outcomes than humans, you have a very strong case that, okay, if the automation is better than the human, you should probably let the automation do it, unless it is slower or more expensive or less safe. So when you combine the better outcomes with faster, remember, time is money, you have a more compelling case to say, okay, this automation is worthwhile because not only is it better, it's also faster than humans. And this is really what we're seeing is one of the primary things, particularly with reasoning models combined with, internet search. So you combine, the internet search with reasoning, and that's deep research. That saves a huge amount of time. I mean, it's not even a matter of it saves hours, it saves days or weeks of research time. So you're getting a time compression factor, and it compresses it down into a few minutes, like 30 minutes. So you're getting a time compression factor of more than 100x. And that's that's not if you discount the fact that humans can only work 8 hours a day, because then it's like, okay, well, this would take me, 3 or 4 days, but you also have to sleep between then. But these things don't need to sleep. So, anyways, you get the idea. We're getting time compression factors of at least 100x, if not more, depending on the task. Then finally, if it's cheaper, money is kind of the gold standard, which is, does it cost less to use? Is it faster? Is it going to make me more money? What's the bottom line? Like literally, what's the bottom line on the spreadsheet? Like where does it move the needle? Because if something is ultimately cheaper to use, guess what? It's economically irrational not to use it. And then finally, if it's safer, if an automation is safer than a human, you have an ethical imperative to use that automation. It's the reason why we get humans out of the loop for many things. Everything from switchboard operators to tractors. Like this is why you use levers on a tractor instead of doing things manually, because you don't want to get sucked into the tractor parts. That's a agricultural mechanical kind of automation, but you get humans as far away from the danger as possible. But then also, let's imagine that there's an automatic robotic doctor or surgeon that produces better outputs in the future. It would be unethical to practice medicine on a human if you're not that good at medicine compared to an alternative. And finally, in the long run, we're really talking about what we're talking about here is first mover's advantage. If you engage in these kinds of things, if you are constantly exploring saying, where can we offload? Where can we delegate to the automation? Where can we delegate to the robot or the machine? You will ultimately be in better shape. Now, this applies not just to corporations or governments. This also applies to individuals. As I mentioned earlier, I use AI to help format these slides. I'm still very thoroughly engaged saying, okay, this is what I want the slide to say, and those sorts of things, and then I do some post edits. But that has helped me get ahead of the game, because now I have better slides that save me time and energy, which improves my life and improves all other outcomes. And then the network effects means that it helps all of you, because now you have nice, pretty slides to look at during my videos. Yeah, I mean, that's all there is to it, is if you're not moving on this stuff now, then you're falling behind. So, thanks for watching. That's why OpenAI is still in the market dominant position. That is their core theory. That is their core philosophy. Now everyone knows that cognitive offloading and cognitive delegation is the way of the future. All right. Cheers. Have a good one.